Marketing and Communications Manager at Data Conversion Laboratory, and I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. So please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we will make them available on our website. Next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get it ready for tomorrow's technology. Next slide, please. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs, today and in the future. Next slide, please. DCL serves a very broad client base. Next slide, please. Spanning all industries. Next slide, please. Today we are thrilled to introduce Marley Mesabov. Marley is a content strategist with passion for the user experience. Her work spans websites, web applications, and mobile for enterprise companies and startups across the country. She is an editor at User Experience Booth and a frequent conference speaker. Marley can be found on Twitter at Mars and the Stars, where she shares thoughts on user experience design, content strategy, and the Muppets. You can learn more about her and her work at http://marley.us. Without further ado, welcome Marley.
Hello. I'm glad to be here today. I'm glad to be able to talk with you all about some ideas that I've been thinking about lately, and really this sort of crazy world that we all live in, where we've got all these different terms that mean something specific to us, but that we need to communicate to our clients. Now, you may have noticed that what's written under UX practitioner here on my bio page may not make a lot of sense to some of you. I wrote these in 3 different quote-unquote fonts available with Microsoft Office. They are Wingdings 1, Wingdings 2, and Wingdings 3. It's not a typo. It's 3 different sort of languages. I did a little research into why it is that we have these Wingdings on our computer, and the reason is that when computers were really new, and Microsoft Word in particular was brand new, and they were trying to create the interface, they realized that sometimes people were going to want to put symbols into their documents. Sometimes the letters and the numbers that we have available to us, which interestingly enough are also symbols, that those weren't going to be enough. That sometimes we were going to want to be able to communicate something like stop or close, which is shown with an X, or a volume control, which is shown in that first line of Wingdings, or an up arrow. These ideas that we have these symbols that mean much more than even the words that we have mean. It goes as far back as the hieroglyphics. And in some people's situations, such as my father, sometimes you look at his handwriting and you think we're still using hieroglyphics. The long and the short of it is, we have these symbols which sometimes everyone agrees on, like in the language, everyone who uses the same alphabet that we use in the U.S. agrees that a G makes either the sound g, 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 or j, 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 and the one that we call an M makes the m sound. Everyone agrees that symbol means essentially the same thing. We look at this symbol. We say, well, what does it mean? To everyone in the entire world who has ever driven on a road, this means stop. Whether or not you can read those letters, you know that this red octagon means to stop. Then we have some symbols that can mean 2 different things. If I asked you and you asked a 3-year-old what this meant, the 3-year-old might say that's a B. But if you asked a hockey fan, they would say this symbol means the Bruins. This is a symbol that has a cultural bias. Now, on the other hand, we've got this symbol, If you asked my grandmother what this was, she would say it's a semicolon, a dash, and a parenthesis. It's 3 different symbols. But if you asked a 14-year-old what this is, they'd say it's flirting. And if you asked most people who write emails, they would say, oh, it's a winky face. So again, here we have a generational divide in how we understand this symbol. And yet, both the people who say it's a winky face and might send it to their boss, and the people who say it's flirting and would only send it to somebody they were attracted to, feel confident in using this symbol because they use it within a specific confine where it means the same thing to them and to the person that they're sending it to. Then we have symbols like this. There was a very interesting article written recently in the New York Times, which I highly recommend checking out, about the use of punctuation in texting and email. And the conclusion that the journalist had come to upon doing some research and a lot of interviews is that since we have these conversations now that don't take place in person and we can't take visual cues from people's faces, we have to look for other ways to communicate what our faces or our body language would be displaying. So instead of saying, what do you mean, we put 3 question marks, which is supposed to identify to the person we're communicating with that we are completely and utterly confused. So we have these new symbols or these old symbols that mean new things now, that take the place of a word or a whole sentence or a paragraph of explanation. Then we have symbols in the form of imagery. I might ask you, what does this symbol mean to you? And you might say, it's adorable. It's a sign of cuteness that you want to share something that made you smile. Other people might say, it's representative of cooking children. Obviously, there's a lot that we can take from this. You might even say it's representing a kitchen or a chef's hat. In this situation where we actually have a combination of different visual cues going on, we can communicate something much more complex. Then we get into words, which are a combination of symbols in a different way. Here we have a combination of 4 different symbols that represent 4 different sounds, 2 of which, when combined, represent a totally different sound from either of them on their own, the C and the H. And yet this word, these 4 symbols, when put together, make the word chef. And that's a symbol that represents someone who cooks in a restaurant or maybe wears a hat like the baby in the last symbol we looked at. So what does this all have to do with content strategy, content marketing, and bears? Well, let me ask you a question. What's this symbol? Here's a combination of symbols that create something different. And put all together, it identifies a person who is in a specific position to foster communication within your organization. This represents certain responsibilities, certain needs. It represents something to the client. It might represent something different to the C-level executive. I mean, ultimately, it might leave some C-level executives feeling like this, saying, well, what is a content strategist? Is it someone who creates content or someone who owns content and is responsible for making it usable and valuable? Is it someone who creates the brand strategy and the guidelines for content creators to follow? And let's talk more actionably. Those of you who have heard some of my previous webinars, I am curious about the theories behind this and how we got to where we are, but today we're going to focus on action items. What is the actionable piece? How can you create content within your organization and set up governance tactics and a process that will work smoothly, work well, and create something fantastic for your clients? What it all comes down to, the best symbol I could come up with to represent what content is across an organization is a dollhouse or a real house. Because when it comes down to it, there are two areas there are two perspectives from which you can look at content. You can see the inside, all the little rooms, the different places that people do things, where the steps go up in the bottom and how it comes up to the living room, how the different rooms fit together, where the hallways are, where the windows look out into the rest of the world, what chairs are really comfortable, all of these little details, who cleans the house, who owns the house, who pays the bills for the house. But all the clients see is what's on the outside. They don't see all the care and effort that's taken to put shutters on the windows or trim or the painting or the nice dinner that you can smell through the open window. All they know is looking at the outside, what do they see? All they know is what comes out. Let's start on the inside. On the inside, we've got a lot of different people involved. We've got a content strategist, a content manager, a content marketer, a content creator, a content editor, a content engineer. Sometimes all of these different jobs fall on one person. Sometimes it's split up among different departments, different even areas of the organization. And they all have different goals. Start with the content marketer. The content marketer's goal is really to focus on the company, to market the company, and to bring in new customers. And they have a lot of tactics that go along with this. They're creating content frequently to market the brand, the product, or the company. Sometimes that means creating ads. Sometimes it's creating white papers or ebooks. HubSpot does a lot of content marketing, all inbound. All of their content marketing is around creating content that will bring users to their site. Now, then we've got the content strategist. Some people are going to say the content strategist should actually be in the marketing department. Some people say content marketers are doing their own strategy. Sometimes they are. But this is what makes a content strategist. The strategy piece, the fact that the content strategist perspective is not necessarily that we're creating content, but that we're supporting company objectives, and we're doing that either by curating or culling or creating content. But their first priority is to look at the big picture. So it doesn't mean that the content strategist can't create content, but it does mean that a content creator who doesn't look at the big picture is not a content strategist. And they have their own tactics to do this. Sometimes they're using style guides, editorial calendars, workflow, and governance plans. Probably one of the most interesting conversations I get into with a lot of my clients, the sort of aha moment that I love having, is when the client says, "Oh, so you're not going to be my copywriter?" And the response I give them is, "I could be your copywriter, but I can also set you up so that you can write your own copy, or anyone else can write your copy, and we'll all write it with the same voice. We'll all write it following the same guidelines, and I can put a process in place so that you won't need to spend all your time finding copywriters or writing, or even writing new copy." Then we've got content managers. To my mind, the content manager, they lay down the law. I love content managers. I love when companies have content managers. Sometimes the content manager is also figuring out the content strategy. Other times the content manager is also the product manager. But they're the ones focused on when is content produced, where is it produced, when is it edited, when is it retired or archived or set aside for a while. They're the one who's actually getting down to that nitty-gritty, calling the shots, making the decisions. To that end, if the content manager is not also the content strategist, then they're the one who's going to have to approve any strategy the content strategist comes up with. Sometimes the content manager is also a project manager, particularly when we're talking about content used to support an application or an intranet, for example. Other times the content manager is also the content owner. The content owner's goal is to ensure that the content actually gets created and produced. Sometimes this is a C-level exec. Sometimes this is a strategist. Sometimes it's a manager, be it of a product or a project. Now, the tactics here are very different. The content owner is responsible for internal reviews, managing up. Now, some people aren't familiar with what that means. Generally speaking, when we manage up, it means that we're the person who's managing up is the person explaining to their bosses and their bosses' bosses why what the people under them are doing is important. Essentially, it means protecting your team, protecting your work, in this case, protecting the content. And to that end, the content owner is also the one who's going to be coordinating the calendars. Essentially, they're the one who knows where content is at any given time, at any given moment. Then we've got the content creator. This is the one that the clients really know about, right? This is someone who has to actually create that content, put it out there, make videos, make images, write copy, whatever it is that needs to happen. This could be a whole team. A lot of times this is freelancers on a chart where we're looking at our core team and our extended team. A lot of times the content creators are out on the outskirts. They're the ones only being pulled in to do some of this work. And clients really struggle when they just get a creator and no one is looking at the big picture, but they're not sure why they're struggling because they knew they needed somebody to create content. Equally, teams get in trouble when they've got so many people responsible for figuring out the strategy, but nobody doing the actual work. And their tactics, they have tactics as well. You know, a content creator isn't a mindless drone. It's not a monkey. A content creator is somebody who does brainstorming and works with internal reviews. They're the ones creating the outlines, the storyboards, the sketches, and then actually putting content on a screen and putting it out there, or sending it back to the content manager, or testing it out to make sure that we've got content that appeals to the end user. So that's from the inside. But what's going on the outside? When you've got a house like this, all the client's seeing is what's on the outside. The client sees, kind of an unkempt yard. They don't see that inside the house everything is spotless because we're going to take care of the yard tomorrow. Or they don't see that actually the guy responsible for the house broke his leg and is on bed rest inside, and so he can't come out and rake the yard. The client doesn't see any of that, and they don't really care. So they don't care that the content manager left and we've been trying to replace him for 3 months. All that they care is they're not getting actual content created, or the content being created isn't aligning with their goals. When it comes down to it, our actions just speak louder than our words. So it's clear to the client that the outside is messy because that's what they can see. They see what's actually being done. What we do is what's really important. It doesn't matter if we're calling ourselves the manager or separately from the creator. If you don't have that work actually being done, none of it matters. And that brings me to what I really want to talk about today. Who are we? Who are these content managers and marketers and strategists, and honestly, who are these content bears? Well, we're a few different things. We're vampires. I worked on a project about a year ago where in my first meeting I was told that it was going to be my job to pull together governance rules for the entire project. And so they gave me a list of the people who were working on the project, and they said, these are the people who are going to have to follow the governance rules, set up governance for them, tell them what they need to do, and then make it happen. But they didn't have contact information for me for any of these people. So I looked down the list, and I said, well, being a good content vampire, I'm going to feed off other people. I need to know what they're doing. I need to know what they need. I need to know what their actions are. I need to know what their day is like. That's the only way that I can create a governance plan that's going to work for them instead of adding more work to their day. But I didn't have access to any of these people. I just had a list of their names and their jobs. So I went back to the project manager and I said, can you set up a meeting for me with 5 of these people? And he said, no, they're all too busy. If you want, you can give me some questions and I'll send it out. Sure. So I gave them a couple of basic questions. They sent it out. They actually CC'd me. So now I have people's email address. And none of the people wrote back. I emailed them again. I said, hey guys, I really want to make your lives easier, come up with some good governance tactics that will help you in the long run. And everybody said, oh, that sounds great, but I just don't have any time. Can we work on this in a couple months? And I said, well, we could, but you're going to launch in a couple months, and you're going to need the governance in place for that. Really won't take much time. And they said, we really can't give you any time. So I went back to the project manager, and I said, I want to help your team. I want to create governance. Here's a basic look at what a governance plan might look like, but I don't know that will actually help them because I don't know what they're doing. I haven't had any communication with them. I haven't been able to suck their lifeblood. And the project manager said, yeah, I don't think this governance plan would work for them because, well, they're too busy and this is asking them to do a lot of things on their own, and the project doesn't quite work the way that you're assuming it does here. And I said, this is good information. Can you go through and mark those things? And he said, no, I'm not the right person to do this. You would really have to talk to the team. What it comes down to is I needed access. I needed either the project manager to work with me to actually schedule time, or I needed to get across, I need to do a better job of communicating to those end users why my work was going to be beneficial to them. Because if I don't have access to those end users, I can't put together something that is representative of their needs. We're also magic mirrors. We reflect the business's commitment. A large law office asked me recently for a basic scope of what they would need to improve their 5-page site. Each of their 5 pages scrolled and scrolled and scrolled, tons of information. I looked at it, I looked over their goals, and I identified a fairly large scope that would take those miles and miles of 5 pages and break it out into a complex navigation that would be fairly intuitive to their users. I would include some tree testing to make sure that we were setting up the correct IA. I wanted to obviously have some stakeholder interviews, some user interviews. Once we got into actually designing the content, I wanted to work with their design, with the designer that they were looking at hiring, and figure out what kind of templates we could put together so that they could trade in and out content whenever they wanted, since they had identified that as one of their goals. Basically, they were asking for a pretty big site redesign, including possibly a CMS migration. They looked at it and they said, you're dead on with what we need, but I think we need this done in about half the time. And I considered saying, nope, can't do it. But I realized that if I said no, they were just going to go to somebody else and ask the same thing. And eventually they would find someone who would say, sure, would give them half the work, and then they would be left going to another company and trying to redo it because they didn't like the new redesign. So I said yes, but I outlined for them what a project would look like in half the time. Half the research, half the detail, twice the assumptions. Then I outlined a few smaller versions of the project that would make some incremental improvements, but not go whole hog. Essentially, I made it my job to reflect to them what their commitment, both in time and in money, would create. if they gave me a tiny budget and no time, I would only be able to reflect back to them a tiny amount of work in no time. If they were willing to put forward a little more, I could reflect a well-thought-out small project. If they wanted something that was going to take over the entire piece, they were going to need to provide me with something to reflect. We're also puppies. This is moving away a little bit from my evil vampires and magic mirrors, but we're puppies. Let's be honest. People who work in this UX and content strategy area, we tend to have a lot of energy. And to that end, we can accomplish amazing things. Now, I've always had a lot of energy. I've always gone sort of above and beyond what has to be done, but I don't always go in quite the right direction. When I was 7, I was in the 2nd grade, and our teacher sent us home with instructions. She told us to write a short story about the jungle. I got very excited. We'd been studying all these animals in the jungle, and I wasn't really sure where to go with it. So after thinking about it a little bit, I decided I would love to write a story where the monkey started talking with the sloth, and they became friends and climbed trees together all day, and the monkey could carry the sloth on his back because the sloth was so slow. I wrote a whole story about this. Included a bunch of other jungle animals, the interesting conversations they had, sharing their food with each other. Very proud of myself. I handed it in. Turns out the story was supposed to be nonfiction. But because my teacher had given us the instructions and left us on our own for 2 weeks to do the work, I didn't find out I was going down the wrong direction until I'd already put so much time and energy into it. When I first got started in content strategy, I had a similar problem. I had a lot of energy, but I didn't know what questions to ask. As a 7-year-old, it never occurred to me to ask, do you want a fiction or nonfiction story? I'd never been to the jungle. Any story that I told was going to be fiction as far as I was concerned. But my teacher was looking for a story that described what happens in the jungle, what the different animals do with their days. Not planning birthday parties for each other, but actually moving along the ground, impacting the trees and the various vegetables or fruits or whatever grows in the jungle around them. Now, as a beginner content strategist, I knew to ask if something should be fiction or nonfiction, but I once spent 2 weeks building out solutions for a marketing department before learning that they'd already tried everything I was recommending. Now I've learned to ask first, to make sure I ask, what have you already done to this as part of this effort? Can we make time for full conversations about this so that I can learn from you before I move forward? Interviews are so important. User interviews, stakeholder interviews, I can't emphasize enough how valuable I find user research to be. Because if you ignore your content strategist, we can't promise we'll go in the direction that you expected us to. All right, back to the bad guys. We're flying monkeys. Now, in The Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch captures Dorothy and her friends. She sends her flying monkeys out. She tells them, she says, bring me the girl and her friends too. Do what you want with the rest of them, but bring me the girl alive. And the flying monkeys fly off. They capture Dorothy. They mess up the Tin Man and the Scarecrow. And then they successfully bring Dorothy and Toto back to the Wicked Witch. And her little dog, too. Similarly, if you work with your content strategist to identify your goals, they'll be able to build out a content strategy that incorporates metrics so that we can track how many customers we're attracting, so that we can track how many customers we're attracting and see if we're meeting our goals. For example, I had a client once who had a brilliant idea for this huge website where people would be able to track what they were eating and how healthy it was for them. It was such a great idea. It aligned with what they'd found lots of nutritionists were looking for to use in their work. Lots of people said they wanted it. And so they said, all right, we're going to build it. And we know if we build it, people will come. Well, unfortunately, there are so many websites and so many applications available online these days. That's just not true. This is not Field of Dreams. But if you explain your goals, then your web team, your analytics people, your content strategists, they'll be able to work together to build a structure that will incorporate inbound marketing maybe, getting those content managers and content owners to work together with the analytics team or with the design team or the development team. And together, we will build a structure that will capture the customers. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, we're scientists. A lot of people talk about user experience as an art and creating content as an art, and I get that. In fact, it's one of my favorite things about content strategy. When I first started working in UX, I was a project manager, and the reason I got into project management was I saw these companies where designers, these incredibly creative people, got to work together, and I wanted to work alongside them, but I'm not artistic. I can barely draw a stick figure. I have no design mindset whatsoever, or I didn't then. And I thought, if I can just get to wake up every day and work with these amazing, creative, artistic people, I'll be so happy. And I started working as a project manager, and I did love it. I loved working beside creative people, and over time I learned from them. And I started, if not being able to design my own work, at least being able to put together basic wireframes, understanding some best practices, having a design eye, being able to point out to others, wait, that doesn't quite grab the user's eye, or could we make this more prominent, or how can we bring this out more? And then one day I realized that it wasn't just about the design, that the words on the page mattered too. And that was an area I've always been good with. I can do words. Turns out, working with words is creative. And yet, with all that said, I still say we are not creating content as an art. When you're creating content within a content strategy, and particularly when you're building that strategy, you're measuring it against things. You're acting as a scientist. You focus on the quality, and you focus on empathy, and you certainly utilize all those soft skills. But every project starts with the numbers, starts and ends with the numbers. We track metrics, we test ideas. If they fail, we try new ideas. If they succeed, then we build off of them and continue to test. We do research, we get hard numbers, we prove our case. One project example of this was a team that came in already. They'd already been tracking for 6 months with the tool OmniGraffle. They'd been tracking what they expected the user journey to be and where people were falling off. And it's one of the best content strategies I've ever been able to put together, because we looked at that and we said, based off of this information, we know where the problems are, and we can set very concrete goals. We're scientists. Now taking this and going out into the world with it, we need to look out for ourselves. Content strategy in most places is still a very small subset of the company, the tiny department. So how can we make sure that we best get cared for and fed? Well, we can stand up for ourselves. And I don't mean we need to be aggressive, but we can identify what resources we need. We can ask for things. And one thing that's really key is connecting everything back to the business's needs. Hillary Marsh recently wrote a great article for UX Booth called Selling Content Strategy to Management. I may have that title off by a few words, but if you search for Hillary Marsh on UX Booth, the article is fantastic. And she talks about this, about how important it is. Nobody's going to listen to you saying content's valuable because it's valuable, and you don't want to have to make wild guesses as to why it will be valuable. You want time to measure and experiment and identify what the goals are and what metrics you're going to be tracking. So instead of promising, I can get you 50% more customers, ask, what are the goals? What are the goals of the company? And then look for ways that you can connect what content brings to the table to those business needs. Alongside that, I struggled a little bit with calling us flying monkeys because flying monkeys do make it sound like it happens by magic. And nobody does well with magic. That's so 2005. These days, when you tell a client that you can just get it done, they smell snake oil. And they worry about that. And C-level execs are exactly the same. I'm not saying they're the same as clients, but in a way, they're the same in that they can smell when you're not being genuine. So, the better plan is to present a theory. Explain what the next steps will be. Let them essentially follow along in their book so that when you check in with them, they're less likely to be shocked by what you're doing. Somebody I was working with recently told a client, we don't want you to have aha moments. We want you to come into every meeting with us and say, yep, this is what we expected. We almost want it to be ho-hum. We want it to be so obvious, and we want to have communicated so well with you as to what we'd be doing that you just know what's going to happen. And lastly, we need to create solutions. There's been a lot of push lately to get away from the deliverables business, and I support that. I think sometimes when we focus on deliverables, it takes away from the big picture. Other times, deliverables are a really useful way to showcase something or to share something. It's a case-by-case basis. But what's more important than creating deliverables is creating solutions. It keeps us on track. Focusing on the solution, creating a solution, stops you from getting into the trap of creating content for content's sake, or even creating a content strategy for the strategy's sake. Think about what the benefit is of doing each action that you take. And ultimately, when we follow these 4 steps, and when we think of ourselves as scientists, as flying monkeys, as puppies, as vampires, we will get fed and cared for the way we need to be. I'm happy to take questions at this point. This is a very broad topic, and yet there are very specific ramifications. That's something that each and every one of us deals with every day, figuring out how to be taken seriously in this new field, and also how to represent yourself. So I'm particularly looking forward to taking any specific questions that people have about how to make this successful in their own organizations. And I hope that even if you don't think of questions just now, I hope that you'll follow up with me. I'm on Twitter at Mars and the Stars, and I'm also available at marley.us. And I look forward to continuing this conversation for a long time to come.
Great. Thank you, Marley. Very informative webinar indeed. The first question that has come in is, do you think content strategy should be part of the marketing department?
Sometimes. I know that sounds like a non-answer. But content strategy is actually in this very interesting place right now where it sort of lives in some departments, in some companies rather, organizations, it lives in marketing, and in some organizations it lives in UX. And I think ideally a content strategy department could actually be its own thing. But it's really going to depend on the needs of that company. For example, a lot of product-based companies find that the only content they're creating is for marketing. And to that end, the strategist either needs to be one of the marketers or at least needs to be very, very closely affiliated with the marketing department to make sure that all the content being created for marketing is adhering to a specific strategy. That's actually where marketing strategy and content strategy become interchangeable. However, for an agency, for example, which is most of my experience, the content strategist isn't creating the strategy for the company's marketing. They're creating strategies for individual clients. And in that situation, they need to be working very closely with the design team, either in the design team or, again, as sort of this separate piece that can contribute to more than one area.
Thank you, Marley. The next question that's come in is, how can I share this information with other people in my company?
Well, that's where we get back to deliverables. I suggest that if you've got a large company that wants to explore this in more depth, consider having either a team lunch or a very short presentation, but encourage dialogue, encourage questions, question and answer. One thing I've also found to be very successful for companies that are just getting started with content strategy but haven't quite evangelized it across the organization is to do reports and case studies on projects after they're completed. Save screenshots and key comments, any quotes that you get from clients along the way. It's all internal, so you don't need to get special permission. This is not something that I'm suggesting you publish across the web, but to be able to then internally identify, this is the process we used, this is where content strategy, content management, all of these elements came into play, this is what we were able to deliver, and this is how it successfully solved the client's problem. Another thing that is incredibly valuable is for evangelizing content strategy in particular is to get smaller groups together. So I'll sometimes try to meet up with a designer who I haven't met before for lunch and just ask them about the projects they're currently working on. And when I recognize something that could be made easier by adding in content strategy, I'll mention it to them in passing or tell them about a similar project I worked on. And that puts the ball to some extent in their court, but it also allows us to sell content strategy a bit and just help them to recognize that the next time that they have a project like that, they may want to include some scope time in for us.
Excellent. Thank you, Marley. The next question that's come in is it possible or is it a good idea to transition from one role into another, like from marketing into content management?
I don't know about a good idea because that's going to depend on the individual person, but I 100% believe it's entirely possible. I know, sometimes I wish that we had design training in the way that hospitals have doctors train, where you could have sort of residencies in different areas of the company. I guess internships work a little bit that way, but even that, can be very difficult to get internships and pay rent on an internship. So particularly if you've gotten into your career and you're looking to maybe shift careers, I would say start off by finding other people who take on that role and comparing what elements you're already doing and what you would have to learn. Look for ways that you can practice alternative skill sets. And keep in mind, I tried to clarify this when we were looking at some of those different roles, but for example, a content manager in one company may do very similar things to a content owner in another company. So, definitely look into, is it your role that needs to change, or is it just some of the work that you're doing that you may want to add to or remove?
Great. Thank you, Molly. The last question that's come in right now is, what if I'm not sure what I want to be just yet? Do you think there's a good way to try out different related jobs without getting pigeonholed?
I think smaller companies are great at that. You know, in a small enough company, everybody's pitching in and doing anything they can. So being either a content strategist or a content marketer in a role like that will allow you to try on about 4 or 5 different hats. Another area, particularly if you're coming from a design background, is to start learning more and reading up more about content strategy while you are, and seeing ways that you can incorporate that into UX design. Because there's still sort of this term UX unicorn that's getting floated around, which basically means someone who has a variety of skills. And there's no reason that those skills can't include a lot of content strategy skills that you might want to test out, or other areas within the content sphere. But the easiest way, I would say, is find a small company, the kind of place that's looking for some jack-of-all-trades, and look for mentors in different areas of it who might be able to help steer you in one direction or another.
Great. Thank you, Molly. We'll just give it a couple of moments to see if any additional questions come in. In the meantime, while we're waiting, just want to let everyone know that this webinar has been recorded and will be available to view in the webinar archive section of our website, which is located at www.dclab.com. Molly, the next question that's come in is, my company has a UX group, but it hasn't done much work with our department, and I don't think they're all that competent. Should I try to work with them?
Yeah. You know, for 2 reasons. First of all, because if it turns out that they're, did you say, I'm sorry, Adam, did you say competent or confident?
Competent.
Okay. First of all, if they are secretly competent but just not very good at putting themselves out there, then working with them will be a huge boon. Secondly, sometimes incompetent people or groups manage to stick around because nobody's paying attention to them. So if you try to actually interact with them, and particularly if you keep record of what is valuable and what is just frustrating, or what you're looking for that they're not providing, you may be able to help influence hiring new and more competent people, adding to the group in a competent way, or even putting yourself in a position to help steer what that team learns and where they move towards. Yeah, I mean, without knowing what area of the company you actually work in, who knows? You might find that you really enjoy doing some of the UX work and slowly move into that department. And I assume you could then therefore be more competent.
Thank you, Molly. At this time, this will conclude today's broadcast. Thank you, Molly, again for this very informative webinar, as all of them are. You're welcome. And just to let everyone know, our next webinar will be Tuesday, May 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, titled Optimizing the Data Authoring Experience, being presented by Dawn Stevens, Senior Consultant over at Contact. That being said, thank you everyone for attending and have a great day.